Hi there, welcome back to another video on my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the differences between being a traditionally published author and an independently published author. So if you're interested about learning more about that whole world, just keep on watching. Okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Cassidy. My name is Cassidy and I am a independent author, which is why I am talking about this. I self-published and I self-published 3 books now. So the first one, well, okay. The first one technically that I self-published is my short story collection, Cursed Images, Scary Stories from a Child of the Internet. This is kind of like my baby and my bestsellers so far. And fun fact, a sequel is on its way. I will be talking about that more on my Instagram. So if you're curious about that, hop on over to @writingwithcass. But I published this, and then my 2 other books that I self-published are Cursed Fate and Wicked Breed. These are 2 books in a dark fantasy series, and so this is the first one. This is the second one. And yeah, see, these are my author proofs, hence the bands going around the book. But you can buy them without the author band if you like. Okay, so yeah, I self-published 3 books basically. So I'd like to say that I'm a little bit like dipping my toes into the games of the writing game, the self-publishing game. And I just wanted to make this video for other people who are writing a book and they're not really sure which way they want to go when it comes to releasing your stories to the masses. I think both traditional self-publishing have its pros and cons, so I just kind of want to go over that for you guys in this video right now. So if you don't know, let's get some definitions out here for you. Traditional publishing is when you it's what you stereotypically think about when you think about publishing and how it's been done for quite some time, where you send out your manuscript to different publishing houses or publishing presses, and then they say, oh yes, we love your manuscript, we'd like to print your story, or not, but most of the times, they say yes, and then you work out contracts and rights, and then they handle off all the publishing and marketing and all the businessy type stuff on their end. Whereas with being an indie author or an independent author and self-publishing, you are a lot more hands-on in your own author business. So that's self-publishing is when you use like a platform kind of like Amazon or KDP, Ingram, or I think even Barnes and Nobles might have their own system of using them to publish your stories. And so these realtors act as printing presses and they print it out for you. But you were in charge of like everything that would go into that. So not only are you writing, it's on you to find a cover artist, it's on you to find an editor, it's on you to promote it on social media and to market it and all this stuff into one. So that's the main differences between the two. Whereas traditional publishing, you have amassed, you've gone over the barrier, and you you now have an entire team at your disposal to help you sell your books. And when you're independent, you don't necessarily have that whole team, or you don't have it yet. So that's the main difference between the two. There are certain pros and cons to each. Like I mentioned already, the pro to traditional publishing is you have a ton of resources at your disposal. Whereas, like, what could be seen as a con for indie is that you don't have access to these things. And so you will get shackled on with this burden of being a writer, your own agent, a social media expert, an editor, all sorts of stuff, right? You take on so many jobs at once. Whereas if you are traditionally published, you are more likely to have gone through the querying process to get an agent, and they are the ones pitching your book to publishers, and the publishers are ones that are taking over the printing costs and the marketing and helping you get the right connections and all that jazz. I'm just going to go over what querying is in case people don't know what that is, because I realized people might not know. Querying is basically like when it's the same thing as submitting your manuscripts. So each publishing house has different desires for their manuscripts or how they want to be sent information. It's kind of like applying to a job interview. Some jobs want your resume, some want a cover letter, some want this or that. It's the same with sending out your manuscript. So some places not only want your manuscript, or maybe they just want the first couple of chapters. Maybe they want a 2-page summary. Maybe they want more information on you as an author. It just depends. So it's literally like applying to job interviews, except some publishing or places, they don't take unsolicited manuscripts. So what does that mean? An unsolicited manuscript is something that's not backed by an agent. So not only do you have to do that with publishing places, you also might have to pitch to agents as well. So agents are basically like people who work for some sort of literary agency, and they take on the role of trying to push your story out there. It's kind of like saying that, like, oh, somebody else thinks it's good. So like it's more like peer reviewed, I guess, in a way. um, the agent might tell you that they love their story, but little tweaks need to be changed, and you can work with them on that. Or they like are like, oh yeah, this is great, and then they just start knocking on doors for you anyway. They are really more of like the salesmen and women of this business. And so, like I said, some of the big publishers, like, they don't take unsolicited manuscripts. And even like I looked into it, like with Netflix TV shows, if you're trying to get like a film adaptation of your book, a lot of times with like Netflix, they won't take unsolicited pitches. They have to come from some sort of reputable agent as well. So that's something to keep in mind in your own publishing journey if you are interested in those sorts of adaptations or whatever. It doesn't mean it's impossible for an indie person to get their stories eventually like depicted into movies and stuff. I'll talk about that in a minute, but it is, again, substantially harder, I think, personally. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Kind of along with that, now that we're talking about team stuff, um, for traditional publishing, it's great to have a team because then you get a lot of load off your shoulders and you have more time to just focus strictly on writing, especially when you are working with, if you are traditionally published, a lot of times when you sign on and they have a contract with you, um, everything needs to be done by a certain deadline. And if you have a contract for multiple books at once, all those books need to be completed in a certain amount of time. So it's real, and I only know through a few mutuals of mine, some of their book deals are multiple books within the span of like 2 years, right? So it's a pretty rigid timeline for me, just because I write so slow. But yeah, so they don't have to worry about all the extra stuff though, like the marketing, social media, the cover artists, all that stuff. They don't have to necessarily worry about that because they can just sit down and write, especially when these deadlines are in place. Um, Another con potentially for that is that, like, if you have an agent, a lot, now we're talking about money, which is like the root of all evil, I guess. But when you have like an agent or other people that you need to pay, sometimes they work on percentages, so they get a percentage of your royalties. And one of the main differences between being independently published or self-published and traditionally published is that there's a significant gap in the percentage of your royalties that you are paid. You are paid more if you use a self-publishing platform like KDP, Amazon, or Ingram, than you are if you sign on with a traditionally published contract. The percentages may vary based on your contract, but normally it's a significant difference. But like being said, if you have a team that's really pushing your book out, you have more potential for book sales than you would if you're doing it all by yourself necessarily. So you might get paid a higher percentage if you are independent like me. But again, it's all about putting the footwork out there. Like, there's no guarantee that you're going to sell as many books as somebody who is backed by XYZ, right? But also, you also have to, you're not only do you have your royalties, but depending on your contract, you will need to get paid. Your agent's going to take a percentage of that. A lot of the earnings actually go to the publisher themselves. It's a lot. So if you're thinking about potential earnings, it's kind of a mixed bag. And I just want to like give this like warning descriptor. If you're thinking about trying to become an author to make money, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but this is not the avenue, friend. This A lot of people who write or who are authors, even if they're like, unless they're like big famous, like Stephen King or something, they, it's rough out here. This is not necessarily the industry you go into if you want to make money. Yes, there's instances of people getting really high, like advances, like six figures advances, but something to keep in mind, for traditionally published folks, and I'm just going off of things that I've seen, is that yes, you can get a six-figure advance, like where they're like, okay, we're going to pay you $100,000 for this book, sweet, or for the rights to this book or whatever. Those aren't paid in like one single big installment. Normally that's paid in several installments throughout, a different time period, so it could take like multiple years for you to receive that whole payment. So if you think about it, like, yeah, like that's a great sum of money, um and it's an accomplishment for sure, but it just, those payment methods might not be as glamorous as the initial check, I guess. So keeping that in mind too. Yeah, this is not a very uh like a way to really build wealth. This is an art form. There's a stereotype for struggling artists, poets, writers, whatever, for a reason. I don't think it should be that way. I think people should be compensated for their work, which is a whole other issue. And like people have been talking mess on threads about that, but I don't want to get into it. But anyway, so yeah, this is, if you are thinking about having a side hustle or like a get rich quick scheme, writing books is not the way. It is a painstaking labor of love that takes years to make, and then the return on your investment isn't always like as high as ideally you'd want it to be. So yeah, so talking about money can be a little weird in this business. Like, it's important to talk about money, but yeah, this is just something I want to let you know. Even when you think you made it, it might not be exactly what you would think when you see these sorts of successful people, right? Okay, great. I'm glad we got that out of the way. But yeah, anyway, so there's like the pros and cons to that. I think with indie, I'm going to talk a couple of other like pros that I didn't mention before. So one of the cool things about being indie is that you have like complete creative control over your project, right? A lot of times when you pitch your story to other places, there might be tweaks along the way, tweaks to plot, not just like grammatical fixes, but like tweaks to plot and or story or characters. And it's a lot more of a collaborative experience than if you necessarily self-publish, because at the end of the day, you're the one that has the final say on what your work is. I know, with traditional publishing, author can give their feedback, they can do that, but there's some things that they just don't really have like final say in. And one of those things is like regarding cover. I know it's not a big deal to a lot of folks, but a good cover will help go a long way. I absolutely love my cover artist. She is fantastic. She does a lot of like oil painty type stuff. I'll have her Instagram down here, but she goes by the Saucy Dame, and I actually knew her because when I was a teenager, I worked at Old Navy, and she also worked there, and that was a connection I made back then. And then all this time passes, and I start writing books, and I'm trying to look for people to do this, and she volunteered her services, and she's super professional. She does conventions, she paints geeky stuff all the time, like video game characters, TV characters, stuff like that. And I just really liked her creativity. So when I approached her about doing a cover, I wanted something that felt unique and different, and it's an image that wraps the entire way around the cover. So it's a little bit different than like your traditional type books where it's like more like clip arty looking. Not to throw shade, but a little bit more clip arty looking. But like, look at the like richness of color, and like the fact that it goes like all the way around, and you're just as interested in the images as you are from the beginning to the end. So I love Melinda. I love her. Um, Again, this is absolutely beautiful. I get so many compliments on my covers all the time because it's just how unique they look. Not only that, but so within my short story collections, I always think it's really special to have like personal touches. So my husband actually drew all these little icons over my stories, and he was so excited to do that. And it just, I don't know, I just feel like it adds like such a personal, like fun little touch to do stuff like that. I know a lot of indie authors tend to kind of do stuff like that where they want to make the product a little bit more unique and special. and again, that's something I get to do because I have final say over what goes out into the world. So that's another kind of like emotionally fulfilling part of being independent. And at the end of the day too, like just because you're independently published doesn't mean you shouldn't get things like an editor, or you shouldn't have other people look over your work and give you feedback and stuff like that. When I say it's less collaborative, it is true. Like you don't have to adhere to any sort of rules or whatever that's put on by like a bigger boss type figure. At the end of the day, like you should still be open-minded and like hire an editor. Normally with that, like you can pay an editor like a flat fee of how many words per, yeah, for like per word or per whatever that arrangement is. Or you know, you can have people in your life look it over, you can have somebody look it over, you can have fellow indie authors look it over, you know, whatever you got to do. And like with my cover artist, like she doesn't do that for free, so that's something I pay out of pocket for her because I value her work and experience. And as somebody else who is a small business creative person, I understand what that means. So I end up paying her out of pocket too, and it's like a flat fee. But I have the right to the images I use, and I can use them for promotional content. I can use them like in social media posts. I can use them if I made merch. I have the right to use that. Like she licensed me the image, but I just paid her a flat fee for her work. Yeah, so you have creative control, but you also are like your own kind of like team manager, if that makes sense. So you can still have a team in some capacity. It's just, again, the responsibility shifted to where it's completely on you now. Um, there's also like, there's also this kind of like stigma of independently or self-published books not being as high quality as their traditional counterparts. I understand where the stigma comes from because like there's definitely some stuff that like is out there on the internet that I'm like, ooh, like it looks rough. It reads very rough, but the person is passionate and they have every right to do that. And again, like you know, a lot of this stuff isn't necessarily. It's a lot of opinions are subjective in this. So you know, the same way I think something looks rough, somebody else could be like, oh, this is amazing. So yeah, there's a stigma about the quality of independently published works versus traditionally published works. But I don't think that's always the case, especially with some traditionally published stuff that I've read lately. Like sometimes I'm just like, how? Again, everything is subjective, and some stuff's just not for me. But I've seen traditionally published books with typos or confusing plot lines or just like no plot at all, and they still get published. One thing I love to do, and I know this is gonna bite me in the ass someday, but I don't care. I love listening to like YouTube videos of people reviewing books or like popular books or you know stuff like that, and they read these people to filth, and sometimes it makes me feel a little bit better because like I think with this sort of job, it's very easy to fall into like imposter syndrome. And so sometimes when I hear about like a big someone got picked up by like a big publisher and their book isn't that great, sometimes it gives me a little bit of reassurance that I'm like actually okay. Like I don't want to be a hater and I'm not preying on anybody's downfall or anything like that. But like competitively, like I'm like, oh well, sometimes I feel like I'm not doing as well because I don't have an agent, I don't have X, Y, and Z. They do, and it's not that great. So I'm doing fine. Maybe that makes me a bad person. I don't know. But anyway, talking about quality. There are some stories that start off as like self-published and independently published, and then they eventually get picked up by a traditional or some sort of publishing company. That happens quite a bit. Or there's some people that continue to stay indie and they do very, very well for themselves. I have some examples. Like Colleen Hoover, I believe, is an indie author and self-publishes. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of that woman, I don't like that woman. It is, I would be so ignorant to say that she is not doing well for herself. She's doing incredibly, incredibly well for herself. She writes a lot of romance stuff. Again, not for me. I don't necessarily like her stuff, but a lot of people do. And she is a powerhouse right now. I think she's one of the most popular authors right now. The romance genre took a huge boom during the pandemic, and ever since then, Colleen Hoover has been riding that wave, and she is making a name for herself, whether I like it or not. So she's doing incredibly well. So that's not to say that independent authors aren't doing as well as traditionally published authors are. They can. Colleen Hoover is a great example of that. A book that I love that actually started off as like an independently published story, and then got picked up later on is Legend and Lattes. I've talked about that a couple times on my channel. I just love that story, and I'm reading the sequel right now, and it's so good. But it is a like cozy. It's a the tagline is high fantasy with low stakes, so it's like a cozy fantasy adventure. It's more of like a romance, and it's a queer romance, and it, it just gives me all the vibes. So I love Legends on Lattes. The sequel's called Bookshops and Bone Dust. It's actually a prequel technically, but those books have my heart. It's like the main character is an orc, and in the first book she wants to set up a coffee shop, and she falls in love with this like um, she finds love, and she opens up a coffee shop, and it's just the atmosphere is so great. And if you like fantasy settings or D&D, you'll like this book. The sequel's like that, except it is when Viv, the main character, is younger, and she's helping somebody with their bookstore, and there is a mystery afoot too. So it's like a cozy mystery type thing. But those books were self-published by somebody who already kind of had a following. I believe that they already had some sort of internet following, and then made this book, and then they got picked up by Tor, and so they continue to publish under Tor, which is like not like the big five, but it's a really well-known publisher, and they tend to put out stuff that I kind of like. So yeah, anyway, so that's just to prove that like just because something is self-published doesn't mean it is lacking in quality. Like, yes, anybody can put a book out there through this method, but there's a real opportunity for talent, and undiscovered talent, I think. It's also important to note that from like a social justice perspective, publishing is still like very or traditional publishing is still very gatekeepy, especially for people of like marginalized identities. You'd be surprised at the statistics of people who like it's overwhelmingly white, and it's really hard for certain people to get their stories out there. And even though there's like these companies that are like preaching diversity, and they want own voices, and they want stories that come from people of a certain background, a lot of times they only accept stories of like struggle or something that pertains to like their perceived identity of people from these communities and backgrounds. I think it's also important to remember that there's some people that are publishing independently just because there's more barriers for them to be traditionally published and get picked up by publishers than just whether or not their story is good, right? There's certain factors to consider, you know, gender, sexuality, race. Like sometimes it's harder for certain folks, and we should keep that in mind. So that's another reason why people tend to self-publish as opposed to publishing traditionally, because you know it's rough out here for some folks. Also, the traditional publishing process can take quite a long time. And publishing independently, like, yeah, you still put a lot of time into your craft. You put like, when I say quickly, I mean like for me, it takes me at least maybe like my short story collections. I think it took me about 6 months to write, and then I had to have further time to edit, get everything together, do that. So it took me like a year to release that book. But for my thicker books, like Cursed Fate and Wicked Breed, it took me at least a year to finish those stories, just writing, and then all the time goes into like editing, reviewing, all that kind of stuff. So by no means is that quick, but self-publishing or independently publishing tends to be faster than going through traditional publishing, because there's a lot more steps. Some people sit on manuscripts for a little bit because they don't think the market is ready for a certain story, but they want to keep it, so they have it in like a vault. Sometimes other stories are given preference or seen as a more immediate market need than other ones. So it just depends. I feel like with traditional publishing, things can take longer just because there's a lot more bureaucracy involved, and they have multiple clients, whereas like when you're publishing for yourself, you just have you, right? But if you are a business, you have multiple authors you're working with. Timelines may change depending on other people's needs, so that's also something to keep in mind as well. But yeah, that's kind of like a big well-rounded gist of information for you guys. There's like a couple of like personal experiences I just want to talk about before I end this video. And this by no means is meant to be like shade or drama. It's just something to consider when you are trying to find a home for your story. So before I independently published, I actually got I sent out my manuscripts to different publishers. I sent it off to some bigger names like Tor, and then I sent some off to like some smaller presses. So with smaller presses or independent presses, which I don't think that's the right word for these, but anyway, there's some small presses that start off like with people who want to be authors, and then they want to take on a name for like their own press, and then they get a gaggle of authors with them, and they start doing that, right? And they start their own business that way. Um, so I had a smaller press before, and they were a smaller international press, and I let them print my story. So I was technically traditionally published. I think that a lot of that decision had to do with vanity as well. Like I felt like I was getting special credit because other people liked my book just as much as I did. So I published through them initially, for Cursed Fate, and then the pandemic happened, and as it affected a lot of small businesses in a negative way, and my book was out for probably like a year or so, um, before I decided to separate myself from that uh, publisher. And it was really amicable, like because with my contract, I and I don't think this is the case for other publishers, but with my contract, I gave them the printing rights and like the selling rights, and then I had the rights to my intellectual property. And then the contract had this clause in it where if there was like some dissatisfaction in a certain amount of time frame, then I could claim the contract null and void, and so I qualified for that. So our split was really amicable. It wasn't messy at all, and they were very understanding. So I decided to take my story back, just because they were having some difficulties, and there was some like not clear communication going on with like what was actually happening on their side as far as business goes, and I just had a gut feeling that like I didn't want to be involved with this anymore. So I stepped away from that publisher, and I thought, well, shit, what do I do now? And because I still wanted Cursed Fate to be out there, but I didn't want to wait years and years for that and go through the process of querying again, because when you query sometimes, um, like I queried my manuscript and people didn't get back to me for 6 months to a year or whatever, if they even got back to me at all. So it's hard, and I didn't want to go through all that again. So I decided to self-publish Cursed Fate. So I changed some things around. I edited it. I was a little dissatisfied with the editing on their terms. So I edited this manuscript again. I changed some things, and I got my cover, and I self-published this myself, and I re-uploaded it to the internet. And so now this is under me. This is my name. Bing, it's on Amazon. Something I should mention now that I'm like rambling, but with KDP, they have a certain program where you can get paid more if you just exclusively sell through Amazon, as opposed to using some sort of program like Ingram Spark that lets you sell through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, like multiple realtors. If you publish through KDP directly, like Amazon, you get paid a little bit higher than you would if you try to sell through Barnes and Noble. So that's the arrangement I have. So I'm sold exclusively through Amazon. Listen, I don't really like Amazon like that. I'm not the biggest fan of Jeff Bezos and his evil ass. But again, I'm just trying to hustle out here. So there you go. Anyway, so I sell exclusively through Amazon. But that's just because I found that to be advantageous. Most people buy things through Amazon anyway. So there's that. And it's not like it's not like you wouldn't be able to order my books through Barnes and Noble. You probably could, but it's not like just going to be readily available at Barnes and Noble at the gate, if that makes sense. Okay, so so then I self-published that, and shortly after, I self-published this first because this was supposed to be like my tester in the self-publishing industry, and it did very, very well. So I was very excited about that. So that was the boost I had to get Cursed Fate out there, and it did well. And then Wicked Breed came out in the November of 2023. So that's been my journey with self-publishing. Okay, so that's just kind of my experiences where I had not necessarily a scorned relationship, but I had a scorned relationship with a small press, and then I decided to do myself, and I feel comfortable with what I'm doing now. I feel like I have a system for what I'm doing now, and that I've kind of found my own way. I just wanted to talk about this other instance that was kind of going on in the horror community, and I didn't want to talk about it because like it was some major tea, major drama for sure, but um, some of my mutuals or some other author colleagues of mine really kind of got this suffered because of it, and I didn't want to make a drama video that like painted like that highlighted people suffering that are just like people out here trying to like make a name for themselves, and they're like small authors, and it's not like they're like a rich person or anything like that who's doing horrible things. It was just an instance of something bad getting done to them. So yeah, there was also this instance within a small, not a small horror press, but not really. They were probably like the independent horror press. So this was like a press that started off within the horror community and kind of made a name for itself and was putting out big indie horror names. I'm just going to say the name so y'all know better than to not be with these people. It's Darklit Press. Okay, so there's Darklit Press went through a scandal recently, a couple of months ago, where they were taking on all these really big names in the indie horror community, and they were successful, and they were having even like all these big deals coming up, right? Like getting recognition as like an independent counterculture type book press for horror authors. Well, it turned out, as it was explained to me, that the person who founded that kind of swindled some folks, and they were gathering money for all these projects. There's already issues with authors not being paid on time or authors receiving late payments and stuff like that. But they at that time people saw it as like a minor issue, and then it turned out that they were having some sort of fundraiser, you know, and then all that money kind of got pocketed by the guy who ran the press, and then he just kind of took off to nowhere, and he went MIA and went missing. And this one author who initially was helping him out with her expertise on social media and stuff like that, she kind of got the brunt of that when he went missing and didn't tell anybody where he was, and kind of essentially took a bunch of money from folks. She had to pick up the pieces, and she wasn't, from what I understand, she wasn't really directly involved or anything like that, but she just had to deal with the aftermath. Why I'm bringing this up is because I saw a lot of people I knew that I formed relationships with on Instagram having to like get their stories back from this company and like either self-publish it again or try to find another small press that would want to publish their work and their manuscript. So my heart hurt for them because I went through something similar, and I didn't, you never know, right? You never know who is like that from the get. But yeah, it was just a really big shock in the horror community, and some people, even me, were like, well, why would I trust a small press? Because I got fucked over once, they got fucked over. Excuse my language, but like this gives a bad reputation for small community presses in general. That's not to say I haven't done that. Like I have given, so I know you guys know that I write a lot of short stories, and I tend to send them off to other anthologies that are published under a small press. Like one of the ones I've worked with for a while is January Embers Press, which was started by somebody who I met through Instagram, who's in the author community. And again, same story. They were an author who decided to make this their business and platform other authors, and so they have their own press. So I have stories with them. I have some stories with other random folks. I don't mind those because again, it's just like a short story. It's not the same as having like a whole completed novel, right? And then like having to find a new home for it. That's extremely difficult. But from what I've seen, a lot of people like either are self-publishing now, or they've already found new presses that want to take their work, so they're all settled now, which is why I feel more comfortable talking about that. So everything has seemed to settle down, but at the minute it was like such a shock, right? It was such a shock, and so it's hard, and that's why I feel a little bit more comfortable. Yeah, so that's why I feel a little bit more comfortable like publishing independently, because again, it's me. I trust me. If I fuck up, that's on me. these unexpected hiccups could come from other places, and I don't know. So yeah, is publishing sort of messy? Yeah. Um, well, do I think I'm going to be indie forever? I don't know. I don't know. Right now, I am. My plan. So my plan for future projects is, like I told you guys, there's a sequel to Cursed Images coming out. But this is all about toys and tech of the early 2000s. My sequel I'm working on is like almost halfway done. I'm really excited about it, actually. I wasn't excited at the beginning because I was like kind of stuck, but I really found my groove, and I really like the direction where this is going in, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So this is 2000s. The sequels are going to be about 2010s, internet culture and memes, and like just a bunch of like garbage. Like, you know, so the working title for that one is Cursed Images, Cultivating Self-Image and Selfie Culture, which I think that's a fun title. Anyway, it's kind of about, again, growing up on the internet and how that shapes your identity and perception of oneself and needing to be included in community. But it does that in a way that's, again, nostalgia. It's nostalgia with a twist. It's horror, so it's scary and not a good time. But I think it's fun, and I'm really excited for that to come out. I haven't made an official announcement or anything like that yet, but I think I'm going to do that on Instagram this week, so you guys are the first to hear it. Hey. um, so yeah, so I plan on self-publishing this series for sure. I don't think that a traditional publisher is going to pick this up and be like, yippee, just because novellas, short form works, short story collections, they tend to not be on the radar for most traditional publishing houses or like big publishers, right? So this is always going to be a fun independent project for me. This is going to be my heart and soul, right? This is going to be my baby for a long time. But I have some manuscripts that I'm thinking in my head for like longer works, that I can really see being popular within the market. And so part of me feels like I should query those. I know I've talked about a project that I've been lovingly calling Mod, which is more of a I call that Cthulhu but comforting. So it has some of the cozy vibes, but it's also kind of more literary, where it deals with like existential themes, but it's also a little scary. So that might be more like lit fic. Um, and then I have other projects that like involve romance, believe it or not, even though I'm not a romance person at all. I have some romances in mind that might be more popular within like dark romance and stuff. So yeah, be on the lookout, because I think my longer books I might start querying with traditional publishers or try to query for an agent. Whereas these are always going to just be me. And I think that's how I'm going to just divide the space. So I might be a hybrid kind of girl or hybrid kind of publisher, where I have certain things that are just mine, and then other things that are I don't mind lending to big publishers, and I might do it that way. I just know that like for small presses, I've had some negative experiences, and I've seen some negative things. That, again, I don't want to paint all small presses with a big brush. Like, obviously, being a small business is difficult in itself. So I'm not saying that all small presses are bad. Please do not get that from this video. I don't want that to be the takeaway. But I just want people to be careful, because I think that like no matter what, like there's some things where people want to take advantage of you. Just be smart about it. You know what I mean? I don't want to give anybody any paranoia about publishing or whatever. But yeah, just be smart, right? Just be level-headed. I know with like this, it's a creative field, and so everything feels immensely personal. Even rejections when you're querying feel immensely personal. But just please just check in with yourself, like make sure you're all good during this process. Take breaks if you need to, and everything will work out the way it's supposed to. So yeah, just again, take it from me. I had a lot of big L's in the beginning of my writing career, and now I'm in a place where I feel comfortable with myself and my work. And I'm still doing events that are like you would associate with traditional publishing. Like every now and then I go to a book event and I sell books in person and I meet readers that way. I'm part of the Horror Writers Association now, so I'm part of an organization group. I'm making those milestones slowly but surely. Is it as quick as other people? No, but I'm still working my way up there. So if I can do it, you can do it too, for reals. But thank you so much for like listening to me talk about this stuff ad nauseum. I just want to give as much information as I can from personal experience out for y'all in case you are somebody who wants to go through this process, but it feels very like overwhelming. I want to make it less so. So I hope I helped you out. If I did, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. You can like this video. Also, you can share it with a friend who might be thinking about becoming an author, just to help them out. Or you could subscribe to my channel, please, please, please. That would help me a lot. You know, just being on the internet, that would help me a lot too. And I appreciate your time and your ears and everything like that. I have other videos on my channel if you want to check them out. I have writing themed content, but I also have more personal stuff about me and my interests as well. So thank you so much. And until next time, thanks. Bye.